that. So, there's a few nerds like me on the planet that love metadata for metadata's sake. Probably happily for the rest of the world, there's few and far between of us. I think more companies are coming to us because there's actually business value in metadata and business reasons for doing governance, and we'll talk more about that in the presentation. So without further ado, let me jump into that presentation. Kind of what we'll talk about today is really, and I want to focus a lot on this because we could talk forever about the technology and the policies around governance, but again, only a few nerds care about that. It's really why more and more companies are caring is really because it has business value. That said, if you forget the technology, governance can also often be just too theoretical or too passive. So I like, to think of metadata as really making governance actionable. How do you actually integrate that with your source systems, and particularly relevant to today's call, things like ERP systems and CRM systems, which can be particularly gnarly, for lack of a better word, for any of you who have tried to do that, and really getting the business context around that. And then we'll have a quick word from our sponsor with Silwood, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, as Roland mentioned. So just to step back, what is data governance, right? I think you've probably all seen these in the memes on the internet somewhere, right? What my friends think I do. So again, I'm not the life of dinner parties when I say I do metadata management or data governance. I'm kind of that nerd on the laptop, right? We've probably all felt that at one point in our career. I asked my parents, and then they sort of think, yeah, she does this. They do know the word metadata, but they think it's some sort of librarian. She does something with information. She must work in a library. What society thinks I do, again, we're probably, I'm one of those data scientists, right? That's actually his job of the 21st century. She sits in her lab and does crazy things with data, right? We're not the most well-known thing. What my coworkers think I do, again, if you do governance wrong, I think you can be they're the ones that are always yelling at us to not, or have the right definitions or telling us what to do or setting these policies that just, make our lives difficult. Hopefully that's not what they say about your governance project, but I've seen ones implemented incorrectly, especially in the past, where you run the risk of it just being the person that's yelling at other folks in the organization. What I think I do, I'm saving the world from badly managed data. We actually have my colleague, I saw him on the line, Nigel Turner, and I did worked with a customer outside of London a couple years ago, and they actually wanted to make their job title the Governator for their data governance role. Right? It sounds a lot sexier than data governance manager, but weren't able to get that through their HR department, right? But I think we do some amazing stuff, and what's important to remember is really what we do is drive the success of the business. And I want to talk a lot more about that in this presentation because that's why we do data governance, right? We could nerd out and really, talk about all the conformed data types across the organization, and that might be interesting, but who cares, right? What we're really doing is increasing the profitability of the company, increasing the quality and the reliability of our data, and helping to drive profitability. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and then the technology behind it of how you make that happen. So this is a graphic we use in our practice a lot because really I think it summarizes a bit of both, right? Where we always start is that top-down alignment with business priorities. Why are we doing this anyway, right? And more companies are coming to us because data is a key part of their business strategy. We're trying to use data for better marketing, or we're trying to use Internet of Things data to really understand our product usage. There's so much value in data right now, which is why the industry is booming with anything around data, but I think there's a lot of confusion of what do I actually do, right? So we also go down to it bottom up of management of data sources. What databases are using this? What unstructured data? What applications like ERP and CRM systems? Because as you know, most likely on this call, that's the devil's in the details, right? We can say we want that single view of customer, but trying to get that to happen takes a lot of work. So doing that bottom up inventory of what we have, coordinating those disparate data sources through things like data integration, metadata management, or just that first bullet, data asset planning. What do we even have? I think a lot of organizations are just at that stage of, I don't even know all the sources where my customer data is stored. Think of something for PII or GDPR. You better know where your customer data is stored. You're going to have a pretty hefty penalty. So, definite value in doing that. And then the third layer in the middle is sort of what I like to consider, that's really where you start managing that data to start thinking about strategic advantage. You're doing things to it. I'm creating a master view of customer or product, or I'm building some BI reports or analytics off that. Can't do that unless the quality and the architecture and the metadata and the modeling is there. And then the governance sort of manages that people, process, policy, and culture around that. But again, done in a vacuum, you don't want to write a policy in a Word document or a piece of paper and then put it out there and expect people to implement it. You want to make sure that's actually tied to your physical systems. That's what makes it actionable. So the challenge is getting that all together, making sure we have a business strategy that's driven off data, and then making sure that's actually actionable. So this is a framework we use in our practice about data governance, and really, again, it's starting with those business goals and objectives, and we'll hit back to that a lot in this presentation because that's kind of the so what. Just the quick word of advice where we often see success is trying to find those quick wins. So you could have the best metadata repository, the most comprehensive policy, but if it's not tied to what's strategic to the organization, you're not going to get the attention. So is it a big marketing campaign coming up for a new product launch? Can we tie ourselves to that and clean up data around that? Make sure the privacy around marketing campaigns and opt-out and all of that is correct, right? So pick the right train to ride upon, and then clearly understand the challenges. Why can't marketing get the information they need? What concerns do they have about risk and things like that, and then building the people policy workflows, measures, metrics, and culture, right? Making sure everyone's seeing that. But key to what we're going to talk about today is really that the underpinning of you can have the vision and strategy, but what tools and technologies can you use to really make that happen? And especially when we're talking about ERP and CRM, that can be complicated. So how do we do that? Back to the business drivers though, and that corporate goals. Always important to think about that, and I can't stress that enough, and you probably think I am stressing that too much, right? But before you do any governance program, do you know what the corporate mission and vision statement is? And some of you may. It might be those posters on the wall. It might be in your company's website. And are you aligned to that? So think of this as a fictional artful art supplies we use in our training classes. This might be what the mission is. I'm trying to do a full online retail experience for art supplies and craft products. Well, there's a few things in there. For example, it's online. Right? So if we're trying to support the application for the cash registers in the brick and mortar stores, probably not the most strategic thing for us to be a part of, right? But if we can help the online sales department, if we can understand digital self-service and online social media, all of that is, if you think like me, there's data behind that, right? How do customers interact with each other? How does the digital web page interact with customer data, right? So that's sort of our jobs behind it, of understanding, what are the external drivers in the market that everybody's going digital, or that social media is a big driver, and then what's the internal drivers? I'm trying to do better marketing campaigns or reduce costs, increase revenue. That's always, generally always out there. And then the bottom is, what are our goals and objectives for governance, right? And again, this seems marketing, and if you're techie like I started in the industry, you almost roll your eyes at some of the stuff, right? It seems like, oh, that's what the marketing department does. Everybody's job is marketing. And remember that when you're doing your governance program, how are you going to sell this? You meet the CEO in the elevator, that classic elevator pitch. How do you sell what you're doing? If you said to that CEO, well, yeah, we're rationalizing data sources and getting common data types across our applications and database, you've lost that person, right? They probably don't care. But if you can say, I'm really helping for that big marketing campaign that's coming up, we're improving the accountability quality of data and really building a culture of data so everyone can make data-driven decisions. Boom. That's something they can probably relate to. So it's trying to get those, literally those marketing headlines of what are you doing with governance and how does that help the company? And make sure you market it in culture, make sure the culture is driven and people understand what you're doing and why. So then one of the things we do in our practice, and I always find it helpful, and whenever I skip it, I go back and do it eventually, so it's a good thing to start. Right? It's just literally map it out, right? If I gave it away at the beginning, I'm a modeler, so I think of everything in sort of models, and even if it's a sort of a business level model, write down. This doesn't have to take weeks. It could be an afternoon, it could be an hour, or it could take weeks depending on the complexity. But get this right before you do everything else. What are those business drivers? It might be that we're trying to get to be a digital self-service sales model, just for one of those. We're trying to get that 360 view of customer to do it. Well, why can't we do that? Are we not aligned with the business, or is it, probably disparate data sources? And we have ERP systems, we have Oracle, we have, we're moving to the cloud, and we've got some stuff in Amazon S3. We're trying to do all of these things, and how do we get that view? Et cetera, et cetera. And then, most importantly, how are we going to solve that? So how do we tie anything we're doing with governance? We're establishing a data governance organization to solve that. we're standardizing data elements to help solve this problem. Because again, you're probably not going to get a lot of excitement. You may. I think more and more people are getting governance. Just like you have an accounting department for your finance. If data is an asset, you need to manage that. People generally don't question why we have finance. So I think more and more people are getting you need governance, but not always, and you always have to sell it. So rather than just saying, hey, we're going to have a new data governance steering committee and you're on it, most people are going to say, well, great, I have a day job. But if you can say, hey, we're going to help, have a more analytics-driven marketing campaign coming up, and you're going to be key to understanding what metrics and then how we're going to support that, it might be more interesting to somebody. Or I know you're trying to get better metrics, product manager, about your product. And the steering committee, if you're a part of it, we're going to help get that information you need, or whatever. We'll tie it back to something. And then what we're going to talk more about today is things like the bottom. We're going to create lineage and audit trails to really understand how you link that together. But again, in a vacuum, most folks aren't going to jump up and down about building data lineage, right? You have to say, well, we're trying to get that 360 view of your customer and where all the data comes from, as an example. So this is kind of a handy tool I've given away now, given away my secret. But you can use yourself and kind of highly recommend making sure you're tying it back to the business. So another thing we stress is you use a well-worn phrase, you can't boil the ocean, right? And that's another thing that can sort of scare people in some of these projects, and most of you probably work for a fairly large organization or have. Am I boiling the ocean, right? Am I trying to do too much? So again, start with those key business drivers. Maybe it is we're launching a new product, and then filter out just those data areas that are most important. Maybe it's just we're trying to get a view of customer and product, or a list of our partners or vendors, or something as simple, seemingly simple as region. When we're talking about North America, does that include Canada, US, and Mexico, or just Canada, US, or what do I mean by East versus West? A lot of those seemingly simple things can be very complicated. So pick the things that are going to show the highest value, and then fix your governance on that. And yes, you will probably expand when you do this right. Probably before you're done with that first customer thing, you'll have the people from product knocking on your door saying, "Can you help me?" Because they see the value, and that's really the best way to kind of sell this stuff. And make sure you don't go crazy, because you can't fix everything at once. So pick those targeted subsets, which are driven by metadata. You need to know what systems are assigned with customer. So when we talk about metadata, I've used that word a lot, and that can seem really technical, and it's kind of a funny word. And if you've heard metadata, you've probably heard the term data about data, which I'm not a fan of. That's the most unhelpful definition I've heard, right? And guaranteed to scare people away. How I like to look at it is that metadata is really that who, what, where, why, when, and how of data, right? So who created this data? Who's the steward? Who's using it? Is there someone auditing it? What in terms of what's the definition? Where is it stored? Why are we storing this data? I mean, I've worked with more and more companies that were saying, hey, we've got 4,000 tables and rows, and do we need it? When we're thinking of retention policies, there's some risk in storing some of this data. So not only the cost of storing this, but also the sort of potential legal risk of storing it. The when, how long do we need to store it? When was it updated? Is it even current anymore? We've got, customer data is classic, right? You need to keep that current. I might have moved. I might not be a customer anymore. So really thinking of the life cycle, and then the nitty-gritty how. How is it stored? How is it formatted? How many databases? Is name a character field in one and a text field in something else? All that techie nitty-gritty needs to be done. So really getting that holistic view from both the business definition of the what and the where, as well as the technical. And that's really getting that right is really kind of the golden nugget of how metadata can help your organization. So governance is really one of the key use cases for metadata management. So I recently did a research study with, you may be familiar with Dataversity. They're kind of an online educational community. And this is actually free on our website, the Global Data Strategy, if you go to it, free to download. But it was interesting to me, being a metadata aficionado, that we kind of asked, what are some of the main use cases for metadata? And no surprise to probably the folks in this call, data governance was the #1 use case for getting metadata management, closely followed by some of the other use cases that are related to governance, things like data quality or data warehousing and MDM. So, over 60% of the respondents said that data governance is a key driver for metadata. So I sort of found that interesting as well. So what do we mean when we talk about metadata? And as I mentioned, there's sort of two sides, or at least two sides. You've got your business metadata, so on the left of what do we even mean by customer, right? And I remember when I started the industry and I'd go to some of the conferences, and that was always the joke, right? So all the data architects would say, oh yeah, try and get a single view of customer. And I should have looked around being 20 saying, what? How hard is that? I didn't really get it until you start working at more and more organizations and you see that just that subtlety of, is it a customer or is it what sales call the customer, which is really a product, a prospect, right? And I've worked for some large corporations who've made some embarrassing mistakes by sending renewal notices to prospects that don't own the customer, don't own the product. My banks, for example, keep sending me a statement, and in the same mailing, they send me a credit card statement and then send me an ad for get this credit card. Well, I have that credit card, right? So, many companies still don't have a single definition of what they mean by customer. And then within that, are there stewards? What organization is part of that? Are there privacy and security levels? Is there acronyms, business rules? All of that business metadata that really provides the context around your data is critical. And then as well, the technical metadata. So what column structure, what other domains and abbreviations, validation rules, primary key, all of that stuff that's in your database. And probably once you define that something as simple as customer last name, well, it might be varchar 30 on Oracle customer database with this name, and on SQL Server it's named something else, and just trying to get that single view is a challenge. Why there's important to use tools around that. So a data model, as probably gave that away in the beginning, I'm a big fan of data models. So what is it, right? So I think a lot of you on the call probably have seen something on the right, maybe not something on the left. And I'm a big fan of using literal pictures in a data model. And generally, my customers give a little giggle at first, and then they go, wait. And I think we're all visual creatures, and it really helps when we think at the conceptual level. We have got salespeople selling products, and right away you might say, well, no, we don't have products in a box. We really are a services organization, so that doesn't make sense. And support rep, he's got a headset. Really, we do support through online chat. It's all text-driven, so that's not quite right. Or, in a data model, you might have something like customer and client. Are those the same thing? We kind of have two guys that look the same there. Is it a different? No, maybe client is what support calls it, but sales calls it a customer. All of these kind of things. Or do we mean a customer versus a prospect? Sometimes just actually drawing it out in terms of a picture of the business can help. I had one sponsor actually say, no, our customers generally are a little younger than that, which seems sort of funny until I realized I had captured that person. That was a head of marketing, and they were engaged with the data model. They saw this as a description of their business, and they were actually kind of mapping it out and understanding the thing on the right of that there's relationships between this, trying to get a view of what customers are selling what product and what support rep. Sort of gets folks to understand, if you're not technical, the thing on the right. If you showed the diagram on the right to a business person, they'd probably run away screaming. And some people have horrible nightmares of being stuck in a room. I've literally been in those rooms where the logical data model takes up 3 walls of information, and we bring a business person in and say, if you don't mind, we're just going to spend the afternoon talking about the different data types for customer. And funny, they didn't want to come back, right? But the thing on the right is critical. That's really the roadmap for your technical data assets that support these business roles. Sort of a fan of this next diagram. I made it, but I like it, I'll have to say. So what is a data model? Really, this is that piece of information that translates something like a data governance policy into actionable data structure. So take, for example, I mentioned GDPR, the European Data Regulation, and it could say something like, think of it, the right to be forgotten, or I've said, I don't want my customer information, personal information stored. Well, that's fine, but then if I actually want to implement that, how do I do it? So say it's a simple policy coming out of data governance in the center that all personally identifiable information, PII, must be anonymized if we're going to share it with any other department. Okay, that's understandable. But then I'm the database architect, or I'm somebody doing a BI report. Well, what does that actually mean? Probably, name and email is personally identifiable. But what if I put name and address together? Maybe this I don't quite understand. I have one customer where actually online avatar is considered personally identifiable, right? A lot of folks know that person by that picture. So if that's shared, they can figure it out. So actually doing that mapping is well done in a database, a data model, because that really is the place where you have not only your technical structures, but the metadata around it, the definitions, the context, the other fields that really give context to it. So when I talked about kind of the making governance actionable, or kind of putting the meat or teeth behind it, that's really where a data model can come in. So it's great to have a policy, but then so what, right? How does that link to my actual systems and databases and applications that are running the organization? So I talked a bit about this before, kind of the technical and business metadata. So your technical metadata, I think we covered this a bit, but it's helpful to remember. That's your your table structures. I have an employee table with name and last name and first name and ID. Your business metadata is going to be more around, what do I mean by employee? What do I mean by customer? And you'll see those definitions actually have a lot of subtleties. Employee has been employed in the past 6 months. They don't have to be a current employee. They could be recently employed. Big difference when you're looking about data and retention rules and things like that. Key to where a data model can come in that houses some of those definitions, or metadata repository. And important to remember, there's data. That's the actual data that, in fact, John Smith is your customer. And there's a person behind that, which is kind of the reason we're doing a lot of this governance in many cases, and often good to remember. So, your technical metadata, your business metadata, and then the actual data itself. What's important is to build that holistic view. And this is especially where ERP and CRM systems come in, because say we are thinking of customer, and well-worn example, but also generally relevant to most folks. A lot of that data is in your CRM, ERP systems, right? So think of this case: we have a customer that maybe we had a marketing campaign that was managed in your CRM system, or the fact that I had made some sales calls to this person. Pretty important information when we're thinking about a view of the customer. Maybe in SAP, I've got an ERP system that kind of has some of the product ordering totals, pretty important. But then you don't want those to live in a silo. You might have a POS or point of sale system that actually shows his actual purchasing patterns, that he's purchased our product 12 times in the past month. This is how much he paid. This is where he was when he bought it. And then trying to integrate that into a data warehouse of who is this person? What are the purchasing patterns? Maybe some other information. He's been a gold customer for 17 years, or all the other information we have. That's, as you know, probably on the call, hard to get. And that's where the metadata is sort of not only those definitions, but the structures, and then key is those lines and the relationships between it. So one way to do that is sort of a metadata view or a data model view that can both sort of extract a lot of automated tools in the market. We'll talk about one today that can extract to some of this and create that single view of customer in the center. So whether it's customer database on Oracle and SQL Server and DB2 and Netezza, and that's probably a subset of what you have in your company, as well as your CRM and some XML doing order shipments, and you've got a data lake on Hadoop where you're doing some transactional data, and then you've got your POI. How do I get a single view of that? And then you might get my joke there, the black box of SAP, right? So many of these systems are a particular challenge to get the metadata from. Early in my career, probably not a highlight of my career, I did simply, I think it was SAP, not to pick on SAP, I mean, they're complicated systems, but I was running a metadata repository and just said, I'll just do a scan and get all the table structures and get them back. Literally 2 days later, the scan finished, and the thousands of tables that came back were not the most intuitive things to understand. And this isn't knocking those systems. That's not what they were necessarily written for. They're written to run your business, and the fact that there's metadata in there is probably not their first priority. So they are very technical and very complex, and they can be very black box. So if you look on the left of this picture, generally there are thousands of disparate tables. Generally, and this I think on the left is a pure reverse engineer of the system. You don't have relationships clearly defined. They're just sort of standalone operational tables. Some, generally they're kind of technical names. One of the big systems actually has German technical names. So even if you understood what TX1 was, it's very, very complicated. And generally no business definition. So what Safyr, that we'll talk about for today, can do is actually take those technical structures and create some of the business definitions around them. So what do those tables mean? And that might seem like a simple thing, but if you've tried to do this, that's huge. Especially when you're trying to integrate with something like your warehouse. I need to know what this data means. I can't just say that it's table TX9. that doesn't help me. So getting that business metadata is pretty critical. The other thing, if just when we think back to what we're talking about, the idea of filtering data elements, that you can't boil the ocean, and so focusing on thousands of tables is probably not the most efficient way. So another thing that Safyr can do, a little bit of a sales pitch, but it's a very helpful tool, is to kind of group and categorize some of those tables into, okay, this is the accounts payable tables, and these are the general ledger tables. If nothing else, to kind of subset and understand what I'm talking about, and get that view. So that itself is pretty valuable as you're trying to integrate of what do these tables mean, what's their purpose. And then you can start focusing on the business meaning of data. So as I mentioned, some of these tables, and that actually is a screenshot from one of the systems, like T035 is not intuitive to me what that is, right? But if you look on the right, you can kind of say, okay, here's some addresses, information, and some user IDs. That makes it a lot easier to integrate and really integrate into your governance initiative. So one of the reasons we're doing this, kind of the so what, is, and this is the hard stuff, but these systems can actually help make it a lot easier, is get that idea of data lineage and provide that audit trail. And this is one example of lineage. There's a lot of, it could be impact analysis, but this is a fairly common one. So say I do have a report and I'm trying to do something as simple as how is regional sales calculated. Well, if you're a metadata geek or data modeling geek like me, you even start salivating over that. Well, what do I mean by region? How do I define regions? How do I define regional sales? Is it by month? Is it, all those kind of metadata questions need to be answered and stored somewhere that you understand. And then the big question of how was that calculated, especially if you're doing an audit, that it was happened to be sourced from this data warehouse that has a dimensional data model and maybe some glossary terms that came from a staging area that was sourced from Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, and an ERP system. And that, where again, that black box isn't as nicely readable generally as those nice cylindrical databases. That can still be a challenge. So having a tool that can sort of translate that, so when you're building the warehouse, that can be huge. And that really helps get that fully integrated view of all your customer data, for example. So again, kind of similar to the last picture, but this to me almost sums up the purpose of what we're trying to say today. So that big part of data governance is creating those policies and procedures around your business, that I need to protect PII information, that data should be retained for a certain period, all the different rules around your data that drives the business. Well, firstly, to start is just getting those business rules and definitions. So what's the customer? What's an account? What's a salesperson? Is that different from a broker? All that stuff you do in a data model. And that's a view of the data models a lot of folks don't show. This is just the entities and their definitions. That's key to get ahead before we do anything else. And then, as importantly, how is that implemented on the technical environment? And you'll see right away that gets a lot more complicated, and that's why having some sort of automated tool. So yeah, everything on the first two columns, the policies and that high level, you could do that in a Word document, a PowerPoint. If you stop there, that's where things, you really can't get those two columns on the right of where is it actually implemented, how can I do that audit, how can I understand the lineage. That's where the rubber meets the road, as they say, to use some other well-worn phrases. And that's really where the metadata can help link both of those together. So just to quickly summarize that, data governance really manages the data that runs the business, and that's sort of the why we're doing that, and important to remember that before you start anything. And the value of doing the governance is you can't manage what you can't measure, another well-worn phrase. But really understanding the data helps you derive more business value. Metadata helps understand that, both in the business, technical, and the metadata lineage between it, to get that lineage. And particularly with ERP and CRM systems, that can be a bit of a challenge. And the reason why that's all worth it is because there really is business value, especially, and that's sort of the frustrating part, that some of the most valuable data is in the ERP and CRM systems, and they're also sometimes the most difficult ones to manage. So on that note, I'm going to pass it back to Roland, who's going to talk a little bit more about Silwood, who is the sponsor of this webinar today, and how they can help. Roland?
Thank you very much, Donna. That was fascinating sort of talk on the need for metadata and the importance of being able to understand it as the foundational layer of everything, or pretty much everything we do in terms of information management, data governance, integration, etc. So for those of you who don't know Silwood Technology, our job, I guess, is to help our customers and our partners to answer the question, where's the data? Not, how many customers do we have? What products have we sold? What products are in stock? What products are out of stock? What is the financial position? But to be able to answer the question of where do you go to find that data? And in the context of packaged ERP and CRM systems from SAP, Oracle with Siebel, JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, and eBusiness Suite, and increasingly Salesforce, although it starts off as a small system and then people add to it in various ways, and also more recently Microsoft Dynamics, trying to figure out how that underlying data model is structured, to make sense of it, and then to be able to use it in the context of a data governance project it can be incredibly challenging. For example, we talked to a customer recently who was trying to find out the personal information for their data governance initiative for GDPR. They were trying to find which tables in SAP and which tables in PeopleSoft actually held that personal information that they needed to be able to manage and report on for auditing purposes. Trying to find that in a customized ERP solution from either of those applications is a real challenge and can take an inordinate amount of time. The job of Silwood Technology in our product Safyr is to accelerate that job to make it achievable within a very short space of time. Donna, can you move on to the next slide, please? And Silwood Technology are an organization, we've been in business for over 2 decades now, and have been providing our product Safyr, which is a product to extract metadata from those complex, highly customized applications. Many people don't know of us, have not heard of us, and so I put this slide up just to show you that we work with some very large organizations who put their trust in Safyr's ability to provide their data professionals with metadata from their large packages. Boeing are doing that for data migration into SAP, curiously. Hydro Tasmania did that for a data warehouse project, and Comscope are doing that for a data governance project, etc. So there's many organizations. This is just a small selection of those who've used Safyr. So the reason for putting that up is that it hopefully will give you some confidence that even if you haven't heard of us, that we've done this before in terms of making that data available, that metadata available and usable for data governance and other information management projects. Donna, can you move on again, please?
I'm sorry, there just tends to be a delay for some reason.
No, don't worry. Yeah, we're getting there. So Safyr is a software product that its goal, if you will, is to shorten time to project value by cutting the cost and the time of that source data discovery, that source data analysis that can be so challenging when you're working with SAP and Oracle Salesforce products. As an example, at Hydro Tasmania, what particular tasks they were doing to try to cut, to find particular tables and related tables in SAP that related to particular topics. Originally, before Safyr, that took them about 93 man-hours to do that, particular task like that. With Safyr, after they'd implemented Safyr, that took about 35 minutes. So it's a very significant productivity gain. And of course, it helps to reduce the risk because they're working with the metadata as implemented, including all the customizations. And really, the objective of Safyr is to give control to the data professionals in terms of being able to find this metadata and use it without having to rely on external consultants or internet searches or going and pestering their technical application specialists for metadata and data models. Donna, can you move on again? Thank you. And just very quickly, when we talk about Safyr in terms of discover, scope, and deliver. So the discover phase is pulling the data out of or pulling the metadata out of the source system, and the systems you can see on the left there are those that we support. We also have a mechanism for doing other packages, so if you do have something that's not on the list, please do get in touch and talk to us about that. But we pull that metadata out of that application as implemented and load it into a Safyr repository where a data professional, information management professional can navigate and analyze that metadata to find what they want. And then we talk about, that's the scoping phase, and we talk about delivering. So we deliver in two ways. The first way is that we deliver very significant cost and time saving and extra productivity for virtually any data or information related project, which includes those packages. But also, Safyr doesn't live in a vacuum. The results from Safyr can be used to populate data models, or to be used with data integration, data migration, products from Informatica, Talend, and all sorts of all the major enterprise metadata management tools, such as ASG and Adaptive, Samantha. They all use Safyr. Information management platform vendors such as Datum, etc., also use output from Safyr. So there's Safyr, as I said, doesn't live in a vacuum. It provides that metadata in a consumable way to those other tools and technologies. If you move on again, so what next? I think we may have had a slight technical hitch. We were, in terms of what next, obviously please go to Donna's website at globaldatastrategy.com and start, have a conversation with a follow-on conversation with her about projects and initiatives that you might have on hand. We were supposed to have a white paper via the webinar panel. Unfortunately, the webinar panel doesn't seem to be existing at the moment. So what we will commit to do is to send you all a copy of the white paper by email over the next day or so. That will be the white paper that Donna's produced to accompany this event. If you would like to see what Safyr does, there's a webinar on the 1st of March, just a quick 30-minute webinar just to demonstrate the product. Please visit our Silwood Technology website and you'll see the registration page there. So I think now I'd just like to hand over to Donna to just give you a couple of minutes about global data strategy, and then we'll take questions if there are any.
Yeah, well, just quickly, I think I covered it before, but I think we are a proud partner of Silwood, and we do work closely together. We sort of do the bigger picture around things like governance, master data, data warehousing, all of those initiatives that the metadata piece is a part of. So that's us, and maybe it is a good time then to open it up for questions. I saw a few coming over the chat, but Roland, do you want to kick that off?
Donna, this is Nick. I'll actually just read out the questions. Hopefully you can hear me this time. So there's a question from Simon here. Have you found that executives really want their decisions to be data-driven?
I think so. I think there is some cynicism of you have the great data-driven and then politics override that, right? Or I think folks maybe want their version of the data. There's always that risk of don't clean up the data because I liked what it looked like before, even if it wasn't right. But I think I actually am seeing more and more business users really understand that idea of data-driven, and I think the rise of self-service BI, I've actually been pleasantly surprised working with a lot of even there's the C level, but even a level below of the managers really wanting to understand the data, and I think that's where a lot of these data qualities and data governance is coming through, because they realize that once they see it, they realize those problems where IT might have been explaining that to them, and they say, yeah, give me the report, and then once they see the self-service, their eyes are opened up. Oh, that's what you meant, and we don't have a single view of some of these terms. So yeah, I think there's always politics in every organization, or whether people want to ignore it, but I do see a higher degree of interest in data-driven decision making.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. And then just one more. Nigel's asking, when developing metadata applications, is it more effective to start on the business side, e.g. business glossary, or with a technical metadata repository?
I think it's two. I think both sort of need to be done in parallel. I'm a big fan of sort of top down and bottom up. So I think start in, it may be two groups that are then rationalized, two groups of people that are rationalized together. So I think you have to start with sort of the what and the why. We're looking at customer data. What within that could be almost a whiteboard. What are my main data domains? What are some of the definitions around customer? For example, keep using customer, but I think very quickly you also have to do, think of data modeling or metadata repository land, kind of that reverse engineer to see what sort of systems are out there, and I think they inform each other. I've seen many cases where once that's done, there's data that people didn't realize they had, or questions about the data that are driven from the rules that were built in the application. Maybe that person has left, and through the metadata, you can kind of discover the meaning of some of the data that wasn't intuitive. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's both that are then just rationalized together. Good question.
Okay, that's pretty much what we have. Roland, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and particularly to thank Donna for her talk. It's been extremely interesting. Again, we will send out the white paper that accompanies this webinar. And if you are interested in learning more, please go to Donna's website at globaldatastrategy.com or to silwoodtechnology.com for more information about us and to register for the webinar. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you all for attending once again, and say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.